Y'all can take a seat. Man, it's really good to be with you. We are continuing our series, Center Stage, Christ in Colossians. And this week we have a lot to unpack. I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be good. But I want to bring you back to the beginning of the series. I told you to ask yourself a specific question. And I told you to consider it throughout and to keep asking it week after week. And here's the question. What would it look like if Jesus took center stage in your life? So, man, I hope you've been thinking about that. If you haven't, I'm reminding you of it. And here's the thing. Today, we're going to be asking this question, but in a more specific way. We're going to be talking about what would it look like to make Christ center stage in your home and at your workplace, in both. And so our text covers three aspects of life: marriage, parenting, and your work environment. And so that's what we're gonna discuss. So there's a big idea that's gonna go throughout this idea, okay? And then here it is. Making Christ center stage at home and at work begins with heart change. Did you catch that? I'm gonna say it again. Making Christ center stage at home and at work begins with heart change. It's so oftentimes the opposite, right? Like, what do we think about when we think about, man, we need to do whatever it is to make Christ the center? We oftentimes look to everyone else. It's not me, it's my spouse. It's not me, it's my parents. It's not me, it's my kids. It's not me, it's my work. It's my job. I don't have purpose because of that, because of them. I don't have hope because of them. It's all about them outside of you, somewhere else, something else, right? What I'm proposing is making Christ center stage at home and at work begins with your heart, with your life, with you. Not out there, but in here and in here, right? Let me say it another way. Home change begins with heart change. Have you ever thought, man, I want things to change at home. I want peace, better rhythms, or at work, I want greater fulfillment, right? So we could say this is true at your job as well. Work change begins with heart change. It's just another way of saying it. So that's what we're going to be jumping into. And so I want to jump into our first category. It's marriage. That's where we're headed first. But I want to give you some backdrop before we go there. Because you could read these verses and go, what's happening? So there was a thing called house codes back then in the Roman era. House codes were rules or stipulations or guidelines for how to live within the home. And really, we would put workplace into that because most of them worked out of the home together. And so it covers all of the bases. But a house code, interestingly, the way it would work is they're longing for finding the good life. And so they're trying to answer, what would a good life look like? What would a good life be like in the home and at your job? And so they made these codes to find that kind of life, to generate that kind of life. What's interesting is households were very different than ours today. What do you think of when you think of a home? You think of 2 parents, right? 2.4 kids. That's the statistic. Like, that's the average. That's what you think of in a home. Back then, ancient Greco-Roman homes had adults, kids, and slaves with 2 to 3 to 4 generations, all in the home represented. They had codes or rules to live by, and so that's what he's proposing now. He's actually, what Paul's doing is, he's referring to these household codes, because the language here is very similar to their time, but he's subverting them, he's changing them, he's redeeming them, and he's showing the way that Jesus would call us to live in our homes and at our jobs. So that's just a little backdrop as we jump in. This is Colossians chapter 3, verse 18. It says these words, "Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands, as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and don't be bitter toward them." Now listen, this household code, it would normally go like this. It wouldn't address the wives at all. And in a moment, we're going to see him address the children and then slaves. Normally, household codes don't ever address those who aren't in power, almost consistently in every area and every code. So Paul is out the gate doing something different. He's showing a different kind of redeemed life. He's not just addressing those in power, he's addressing those who aren't in power first, which is incredible. And so it's not just the dominant, but it's all the others. And so other thing that is very countercultural, children, women, and slaves were basically like property in the mindset of the people of their time. But Paul is coming in and saying, no, everyone has value. Everyone is important. Everyone is made in the image of God. So I'm going to address them. I'm going to consider them. I'm going to think about them. So it's a big shift. But let's talk about the first part of this verse. Wives, submit to your husbands. So I want to give a couple of principles right out the gate regarding submission, because it's a big word in our time, right? So here's the first one. It doesn't excuse or justify abuse. I wish this didn't need to be said, right? When Paul says to submit to the husband as to the Lord, I want you to see this. That is the dominant theme throughout this passage. He says as to the Lord, or what is fitting to the Lord. When it comes to the kids, it's the relationship, the dominant focus, the dominant relationship is the Lord. When it comes to slave and owner, the dominant relationship, the dominant focus is the Lord. So he's primary, he's center stage, he's everything. And everything flows out of that, okay? So it doesn't excuse or justify abuse. So let me say it this way. Paul says to submit to the husband as to the Lord. That means as a way of serving God, not in the place of God. Did you catch that? You submit, wives, to husbands as to the Lord. He's not God. He doesn't demand your everything. If he calls you to disobey the Lord or to do something that you shouldn't, you don't obey, you don't follow. It's the same principle in Acts chapter 5 when it comes to the government. We do not follow the government if it calls us to sin against God, right? The dominant is the Lord. I can't tell you how easy this happens. I don't know why. I don't know all the reasons. I know there's a lot, but I'll just give you a story, real quick one. Got a phone call from someone in my family, said, my spouse just beat me up to a pulp. And I didn't even have to think about it. I immediately asked a few questions, got off the phone, and called the cops. It's the first thing I did. This is states away. I didn't have to ask anybody. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to pray about it. I called the authorities immediately. That should be standard. Abuse is not okay. I just want to make that clear. Like if you are in an unhealthy situation, an unsafe situation, you don't just need counseling, you need to call the authorities. Don't think about it. Don't sit there and go, I need to pray about this forever. No. You call the authorities. Abuse is not okay. I just want to bring that up. I know it feels like we shouldn't have to, but I do. It doesn't excuse or justify abuse. Number 2, it's not about the dominance of a man. A wife does not exist as a serf, right? In her house to cater to her husband's whims. Like if I'm just feeling whatever I'm feeling all the time, I'm like, hey, you're going to go do this. That's not what submission is. That's not what godly headship is. That's not what godly leadership is. That's not the aim. As a matter of fact, in Ephesians, and he's going to say it here, love your wives, don't be bitter towards them. But in Ephesians, he really lays out what does it look like to lead. And it means sacrificing your life. Verse 25, Ephesians chapter 5, right? You lay down your whims, your desires, your ways to serve and to care for your family. That's what the husband does. So this is not about the dominance of the man. As a matter of fact, I've told this story before, but man, it just punches me in the face. I was in seminary, super godly guy. He's leading this class on relationships, roles, all this kind of stuff, and husbands and wives and the family. And this guy just pops off and says, well, I mean, we all know that women are for the kitchen, barefoot and bearing children. And I was waiting for the professor to absolutely rebuke this guy. He didn't say anything. And I was like, what is happening? Like, are you just going to let that fly? That is not reality. That is not truth. That is, what are you doing? And so I say all that to say it's not about the dominance of man, right? Number 3, it doesn't extend to all areas of life. So Paul's command doesn't mean that all women everywhere should submit to all men, as if women can't lead, for example, in the workplace, okay? Paul is only talking about the marriage relationship. Submission also doesn't mean agreement. So it doesn't mean I'm going to submit, I'm going to consider only when I agree. That's not submission. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite. It's just saying I'm going to do what I want to do, right? So I want to be clear on that. I've debated on how far to go into this because it's such a big subject. So I'm going to take a few more moments. There is another passage. We're not going to dive head into this, but I want to be forthright, clear, land the plane, however you want to say it. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21. It's very much in the same vein as these household codes in Colossians. And this is what it says. Right before it goes into wives submit to your husbands and husbands sacrifice your life, it says these words, Ephesians 5:21. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Okay? So the question is, does this mean that submitting to your husband doesn't really matter? It's all the same. We submit one to another depending on the situation. We serve one another. We care for one another. Philippians chapter 2, we consider others as more important than ourselves. Is that what Paul's saying in these two passages? I don't. Now, Christians believe two different sides of this. One is, it would be called the egalitarian view, where husbands and wives lead out together. And whatever based on gifting, they would lead. So submission, just to the point, isn't really about husband or wife. You submit one to another. You serve one another, and that's just the way you live. There is a lot of Christians believe that, and they hold to that view, and that's fine. The other side is, and this is the side that I hold, I believe that Ephesians chapter 5 is set up this way. Submit one to another, and then I'm going to tell you what that looks like. In the home, parent to child, and then slave to owner, which I would say employee to employers. Okay? So he then lays out what that means, what that looks like. So I don't think it's null and void, that it doesn't mean anything, that it goes to nothing. I think it actually means that wives submit to their husbands. But the reason why I bring that up is this is a heart attitude. There's no husband that should be going and saying, you submit. There's no command for the husbands to make their wives submit. This is a heart attitude of, I want to serve and love and care for you. This is a heart change, not a, I'm going to demand this over you. Remember, making Christ center stage at home and at work begins with heart change. So let's apply this to marriage. There are two ways we err when it comes to submission: control and avoidance. So let's take a look at this chart. So control and avoidance. One of the ways is when a husband is controlling and has aggression, he's a tyrant. He's a no good. When he's avoiding or passive, he's an advocator. He doesn't lead, and he doesn't lead well. He doesn't ask good questions. He doesn't think ahead. He doesn't stay on top of things, whatever the areas in your life are. A controlling wife is a usurper. Can I step in for just a second and say it this way? It would be, I think in Christian circles, oftentimes it looks like this. Oh yeah, I'll submit to him. But in your heart, you're going, I hate you. And I don't want anything to do with this. And I don't want to follow your leading. And even if they're a good leader, even if they are loving, even if they are sacrificial, they're secretly inside. They're saying on the outside, yeah, I love my husband. He's great. I'm going to submit to him. I'm going to serve him. I'm going to love him. I'm going to do all these things. But in your heart, you're going, I don't want anything to do with this. And oftentimes that goes to God too. And so it's this usurper. I'm trying to find ways to get out of it. And then the other side is, the passive side is a doormat. Whatever you say and do, I'm just going to agree and we'll just go do it. Not thinking through, praying through, considering, challenging, pushing, saying, this isn't okay, this is what we should do. That passive doormat. All these are errors in our hearts. So control, my way or the highway, I submit to no one. Avoidance would be passivity. I don't agree, but I'm going to shove it. I'm going to keep the peace, and it leads to bitterness, resentment, and explosion. And listen, I just want you to think about that. Where are you prone to be? Where do you fall? What side? What category? Maybe you're killing it. Maybe you're doing great. But where are you prone? Where are you tempted? Where do you fall? Right? So what does godly submission look like? I'm going to give you a definition. It's not perfect. Okay? I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that. Godly submission means honest and humble deference to one another. Because we realize there's more at stake than our rights or winning an argument. How does this play out practically? So to counter control and avoidance, this is what I see. Honesty is to combat avoidance. So if you're in an argument, in a disagreement, in a situation, what do? You don't just shove it. You don't just avoid it. You don't just act as if it's not happening, like we'll figure it out 10 years from now. We'll figure it out some other scenario and season. No. You are honest with the person. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel safe. This doesn't feel honest. It feels disingenuous. I think we should talk more about this. I don't want to just make this decision quickly. I think this is a big deal. I think we should ask other people. I think we should consider community. I think we should consider counsel, that we should consider Proverbs that says ask many people's opinion, advice on a certain subject, whatever it is. Can we pause? That's honesty, right? Not just shoving it, not just acting as if it doesn't exist and we'll just keep going. The other one is humility to combat control. That it's not all about you or your preferences or your desires. It's about following the Lord and what's best there. What does that look like? How does that? So if I was going to say it a different way, submission is an invitation to lead. Submission is an invitation to lead. I'm going to give you a silly example. And I was playing pickleball the other day, and there's a guy who I know, he's very dominant. He's a really good player. And man, he can own the court, okay? And there was a joke about this other guy who I played with, and he played one of his best games ever. And the buddy was like, man, why are you playing so good, bro? And I said, you just got to give him some space to play, bro. And what's the picture? The picture is, and it's not really true in that scenario, but I'm just saying the picture is he had space to hit the ball and to do his thing. And he was actually better than we often see, right? Because he had space to do it. Submission is this invitation to lead. It's this invitation to show up, to gain. So here's a couple of questions. Do you ever think, man, I wish my husband would lead? My question is, do you set him up for it or tear him down from it? Just something to think about, something to pray through. All right, let's keep going. Verse 19, husbands, love your wives and don't be bitter toward them. So there's an article, and I just want to challenge every single husband to read it. It's an article by Ligonier. I don't remember the guy's name, but it's Husbands, a Warning Against Bitterness. So this idea of husbands, you are to love your wives. You are not to be bitter towards them. That's a very strange term to me. Like at first when I read it, because I don't think of bitterness, that I'm a bitter person. But then as I read this article, I was like, okay, that's interesting. So he asked a couple of questions that identify and kind of trigger, oh, maybe I'm walking this out and not loving my spouse well. So here's a couple of questions I encourage all of you to ask your wives. But you can find these in the article. Here's the first one. Does your wife enjoy spending time with you? Some of you may not want to ask that question, right? It's okay to laugh. I get it. Does your wife enjoy spending time with you? Seriously ask. Wives, be honest, okay? Number 2, does she feel encouraged by you? Get curious. Ask the question. And if you know that your spouse may be a doormat, you need to lead well and say, no, be honest. Tell me what's up. Tell me what's going on. Do you feel encouraged? Do you feel like I care for you well, right? Question number 3, do you make her feel safe physically and emotionally? Ask the question. Sit down, go grab dinner, grab a lunch, grab a breakfast, take a moment of coffee. Ask these questions. Do you make her feel safe physically and emotionally? Last one, is she proud to name you as her husband? Okay. Like, wow, that's a strong question, right? I'm going to ask these. I haven't done it yet. I got this list and I was like, ouch. Okay, all right. Is she proud to name you as her husband? Because here's the thing. You may say, I'm not bitter. Have you ever find yourself saying things like, man, she's slowing me down, she got in the way, she's not who she used to be, and it just kind of remains? You're bitter towards the person, and it's because you're not loving her, you're not caring for her, you're not considering her. So I'm asking you, husbands, would you get curious? Would you spend some time thinking about, am I loving? Do I think about what she desires, what she cares about, what her dreams are? Do I think about, man, where is she headed? Spiritually, physically, emotionally, job-wise, whatever it is, kids-wise, whatever it is, are you considering her? Or is it your job, your money, your drive, your plan? Are you considering her? Are you thinking about her? Does that dominate some of your thought as you follow the Lord, right? Because here's the thing, if all these questions are a hard no, there's probably some bitterness taking place. There's probably some things in the way, right? All right, let's keep going. Man, I encourage you, husbands, read that article. All right, verse 20. Children, we're going to jump into child-parent dynamic. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not exasperate your children so that they won't become discouraged. I'm going to start with the second part first. I'm going to start with you dads, okay? Do not exasperate your children so they won't become discouraged. Tony Merida has this fantastic list. I go to it every now and then. Here's what it says. Here's a list of ways we provoke our kids to anger. These are so convicting. We should come back to these often, dads. Here we go, if you have kids. Failing to take into account the fact that they are kids, so easy to do. So easy to do. They're 5 or 6 years old. Why are you expecting them to write a dissertation? Like, I'm joking, but like, why do you expect young kids to operate as if they're adults sometimes, right? Comparing them to others and saying it. Why can't you be like your sister? Why can't you be like your brother? Why can't you be like our neighbor's kids? What's wrong with you, right? So easy to do. Disciplining them inconsistently. We could do a whole message on that, whole article, whole blog post, keep going. Failing to express approval, even at small accomplishments. And can I lean in on that? Not just for me as a dad with 4 girls, right? Not just you're beautiful and wonderful. But man, the way you obeyed in that moment was incredible. Thank you. I love you. You did such a good job. And the list could go on. So man, even the small accomplishments, failing to express approval, failing to express our love to them, and every single day, I love you, I'm for you, I'm with you. Whatever you need, I'm here, I'm available, I have time for you. I'm not just driving all the time, right? Disciplining them for reasons other than willful disobedience and defiance, so easy to do. So easy to do. Temperaments, styles, attitudes, all those kinds of things that are just a little different than what you like or see or feel, or maybe they're just different from you, or maybe you grew up with a dad just said no to everything, right? Pressuring them to pursue our goals, not their own, sports, jobs, grades. Right? This is a quiet room, right? Withdrawing love for them or overprotecting them. It's a big one. Man, again, we could unpack so much. I'm going to give you a book. This is I think I'm getting the title right. I read it a little bit ago. Anxiety Generation or Anxious Generation. I can't remember which one. I'm going to bottom line kind of summarize the book for you, okay? It's really good. It's a little heady and long. If you can chat GPT a summary, do it. It's really good. But he says this, all the statistics and all the changes in the last 30 to 40 years of parenting. He says that we are tight on physical play and very loose on digital play. That's the summary of the book. I'm going to explain that for just a moment. We're tight on physical play. You can't go out there. You can't go on your bike. You can't go beyond 100 yards of our home. You can't do this. You can't do that physically. But digitally, You can have Instagram, you can have social media, you can do whatever you want, you can be on your tablet all the time. You have endless bounds for that. And he says what has happened is this incredible anxiety for kids. They no longer understand how to play and get hurt or have things happen and then deal with those things physically, but digitally, they are overwhelmed with so much that they can't process. They don't know how to fight. They don't know how to deal with those temptations, and they are taken out. They're overly anxious. And so, man, I just encourage you, pick that book up. But that's the idea. Withdrawing love for them or over protecting them in the wrong ways. So the idea, if we're going to flip it, be loose on physical play and tight on digital play as they grow up in your home. All right, so let's keep going. So it says, children, obey your parents. Notice the dominant theme again. For this pleases the Lord. He's the center. He's the focus. Kids, students, teenagers, graduates, all of you, the focus is the Lord. Out of that dominant focus on Jesus, what do? You obey your parents. He's the reason. He's the why. He's the source. He's going to give you the ability because it's a heart change. You can't manufacture this. It has to change here so that you can do it out here. Otherwise, you're just shoving, acting, performing, and then later on in life, it's going to be a hot mess. You have to ask God to change your heart as a student, as a child, right? So, man, teenagers, obey while under their roof and financially supported, which means this. Honor them. Honor your parents by picking up your clothes, studying hard in school, being on time at work, being respectful when you disagree, praying through their advice as opposed to just throwing it out the window. Kids, students, children, right? We could go a lot more there, but we're going to keep going. Work change begins with heart change. So we're going to jump into the workplace. So this is verse 22. I've got some things to explain for backdrop, but let's read it. Verse 22, slaves, and I put employees because that's our modern day equivalent in my opinion. So that's not the scripture. That's Clint Harrison putting in employees, okay? Obey your human masters, and I put masters, the equivalent modern day is employers. So again, that's my words, not the Lord's words, not scripture, okay? So I'm going to say it again. Slaves, obey your masters in everything. Don't work only while being watched as people pleasers, but work wholeheartedly, fearing the Lord. Again, dominant focus is the Lord. Don't miss it. In all the areas, all the relationships, all the categories, it's the Lord. The first and most obvious question is Paul condoning slavery? The answer is absolutely not. And we could dive into this for a while, but I'm going to give you a couple just quick scenarios. Roman era slavery is not the same as we think of slavery in the West, in our past recent history, okay? It was not based on skin color. It played no role. It was much more like indentured servitude. So you had a job, oftentimes you didn't get paid for it, and you worked out whatever allotment that you had for years, and then you were oftentimes released. So it's different from the slavery that we think of in our recent history. Doesn't mean it's good, doesn't mean it's right, but he is in no way advocating. As a matter of fact, he says consistently in a couple other places, hey, if you can get free, get free. He's dealing with a broken system, with broken people, and how to live before the Lord, okay? And so the modern day equivalent, the closest that I can see is employer to employee. And so it's specifically written to slaves and masters, but this has implications for authority structures in general, government, prison system, even the workplace. And so what does he say? My life is to please him. My life is to consider him, the Lord, right? Obey your human masters in everything. Don't work only while being watched. How often are you doing that in your workplace? Just pause for a moment. I was reading a stat about how many hours of Reels employees watch throughout their workday. It's staggering, right? Not only when people are watching you, but when you aren't being watched, are you being faithful and honorable before the Lord? My life is to please him. We belong to him, right? Everything flows out of him. Charles Spurgeon has this quote as we think about the people that we work with and work for. He says, "Grace makes us the servants of God while still we are the servants of men. It enables us to do the business of heaven while we are attending to the business of earth. It sanctifies the common duties of life by showing us how to perform them in light of heaven." So I'm going to say it this way. We don't get our identity from what we do, but who we belong to. We don't get our identity from what your boss says or thinks about you, but Jesus. He is where we draw our worth and our identity, and this frees us when Jesus is the center. When we have this heart change and we believe in him and follow him and love him, do you know what happens? No matter what our boss says, no matter what job we have, it frees us to serve and obey and listen and learn. So again, it's not out there. It's not your job. It doesn't mean that you'll never have a job change. It doesn't mean that you don't need a new boss. I'm not saying those things. But the reality is, until you have a change of heart, until you have a different perspective, until Jesus is the dominant theme and not them and not what they say and not what your job is, it's not going to change. Obedience isn't going to be good in your life. So I just want to ask you a couple questions. Many of you have bosses. Do you show respect to your bosses? Do you do what they say pertaining to the job, or do you backtalk, look for ways to subvert them? Paul is saying, don't do that. Man, follow, unless it's leading you to sin against the Lord, follow and obey. All right, let's keep going. Verse 23. Whatever you do, do it from the heart as something done for the Lord and not for people. Knowing that you will receive the reward of the inheritance from the Lord, you serve the Lord Christ. There's that dominant theme again. It's all about him. For the wrongdoer will be paid back for whatever wrong he has done, and there is no favoritism. I want to make this practical for you. Students in the room, but also adults, you can apply it in your own way. When I became a Christian, I failed English 8th grade. I had to take summer school and night school. I was a hot mess. I was all over the place. Y'all know some of my story, but was really bad at school, was on meds, the whole deal. And I thought, man, I'm never going to turn around. I hated school. I hated my teachers. I hated everything. I hated homework. And when I got saved, God said, I'm going to redeem that. I'm going to save this. I'm going to change you from the inside out. Only God could do this. I'm not kidding. School was the thing I hated. I couldn't stand it. It was so hard for me. I'm coming back to it in my emotions right now. I can't tell you how much I hated it. And God said, I love you. I've redeemed you. I've called you to be different. And that means you are going to respect your teachers. You are going to work hard at school. You're going to do what you feel like you can't do. I'm going to change you. And he did. I started making so much better grades. By my senior year, the teachers actually liked me, okay? I loved my I prayed for my teachers. I didn't like everything that they did or said all the time, but man, I was respectful. I was loving. I was caring. I did my best. I told my friends, man, I failed that test, but I studied. I actually got after it. You know why? Because God had changed something in me. It's the same thing in your home, as a parent, as a boss, whatever it is, it's God that changes you, and he can do it. He did it in my life. Whatever scenario, wherever you're at, Jesus is enough. He's enough. So I just want to bring you back to this big idea. Making Christ center stage at home and at work, it begins here. And it begins with him. That's the first step. And that's the next step. And that's the rest of our steps for this life. Let's pray. Father, we are so grateful for your Son, who enables us, who changes us, who gives us new hearts and new minds and new lives, and that out of this life, God, we can obey, we can follow, we can submit, we can love. We don't have to be bitter. We can listen to our parents. We can pursue careers, and whether they're hard or not, we can be obedient followers of you. We can serve people who are mean and broken and hurtful and love them anyways. We can love our enemies, Lord, because you have given us new hearts. There's more to us than just this life. There's more to us than just a job, than just a hard parent, than just a hard spouse. Jesus, you are the center. And so, God, would you make that true in our lives? We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.